All right, so I've got some beginning thoughts about the Lincoln Douglas topic for next season, but first let me take just a few seconds and make my administration and our admissions department happy by telling you that Northwest Christian University offers scholarships for forensics, $2,000 renewable annually, and one of the details of our scholarships is that we give preference to students who competed in the homeschooling leagues. So when we have lots of applicants and some of them competed in NFL and the TOC circuit, honestly, we would rather have you because we think you're going to be a better fit with our community. Okay, enough about that. Let's talk privacy and national security. My initial impression, and I would guess the initial impression of a lot of you, maybe not 100%, is that this is a very negatively biased topic. I think that where there is a genuine conflict between a threat to national security and people's individual privacy, then the easiest way for a lot of folks to go as far as their reasoning is that the privacy has to give way so that people can be kept safe. That doesn't mean the situation's hopeless for affirmatives, though. I want to talk one interpretive issue, and then I have a couple of angles I think you can take on the affirmative that put you in a pretty good position strategically. I'm very happy that the word right got written into the topic, that it is the right to individual privacy, because starting out on the affirmative, that lets you say those most beautiful words in the English language for a Lincoln Douglas debater, I don't have to defend. You want to define the right to privacy as people who are not engaged in law-breaking activity, not engaged in conspiracy to commit terrorist acts or other kinds of activities that are threats to national security. Because if they are engaged in that act, they may be in private, they may be inside their home, they may be enjoying their privacy, but they don't have a right to that. The fact that with a warrant, police officers who are looking for law-breaking can enter their home and that's legal, that means the courts have trimmed back the ambit of that right to where it doesn't cover law-breaking activity. In much the same way, you have a right to free speech, but the courts have found there are certain categories of expression that are unprotected. So, make sure you draw the distinction that the way that I think you say it is, if the negative talks about a particular way of protecting national security that entirely or almost entirely catches criminals, that is really, really super effective and does not draw into its net many people who are, many innocent people who are not engaged in anything dangerous, then you're perfectly okay with that, and that's perfectly consistent with your side of the topic, because all those people who are caught, they're not hiding behind their right to privacy, they're simply using privacy to plan what it is that they do. Get on top of that distinction, I think. Now, if I were writing an affirmative on this topic at the beginning of the season, before you go through the second and third wave of what's battle-tested, I think the beginning of the season, my angle, my value would be democracy. And then I would go further, possibly in the criteria, to talk about healthy democracy and say that a democracy is not just the structure of the government written down in the founding document, that what it is it's the healthy, trusting relationship between government and citizenry. One of the things I think I would do in justifying this value is I would say democracies don't fight one another, and historically, democracies tend to win wars, and you can cite a lot of historic examples of that, and by doing that, you're going to co-opt a lot of the negatives ground about safety. When you say that when you let your democracy become dysfunctional, people don't get safer. But a properly functioning democracy puts itself at risk, sacrifices a certain amount of catching every single individual threat, but that culture of democracy operates more rationally to get to the roots of things that are threats to national security. And there's a pretty good article I think you ought to check out on this. It appeared in the Indiana Law Journal in the January 2015 issue. It's by Jeffrey Vagel, and the title is Furtive Encryption: Power, Trust, and the Constitutional Cost of Collective Surveillance. Now, it's talking, as I'm going to talk in a second, about the controversy over the past several months or a couple of years about encryption and how that kind of sets up the controversy at the heart of this topic neatly, and Vagel makes that exact argument that a healthy democracy is better for collective safety in the long run, but a healthy democracy is not consistent with all these incursions into people's privacy. Collective surveillance, it may catch some people, but it does so at a price, and that price makes everyone less safe. And it fits most people's expectations. Most judges will see this, they'll think it computes as a good Lincoln Douglas value, democracy, and in particular, healthy functioning democracy. I think it's got a lot of rhetorical appeal. A couple of arguments I think I would make alongside that is I would say that surveillance, especially pervasive surveillance of everyone, tends to breed corruption. And what you could do a little reading up over the summer about J. Edgar Hoover and how he became the most powerful man in Washington because he collected all of these embarrassing secrets, and that became how he maintained his power. Nobody could dislodge J. Edgar Hoover from his position because everybody was terrified that what he had on them would get out. And I think if you look into that, I think you'll find that there are other examples of people who used the sort of byproducts of surveillance for the sake of keeping people safe. It became a way that they just themselves became more and more powerful. And in particular, if you read up on the national security state, you'll find that a lot of people make the argument national security is often used as the be-all, catch-all argument for the agenda that the party in power wants to pursue. And in particular, what people will do is they'll justify what they want to do through national security, but really what it is they want to cover up their mistakes. Really what they want to do is avoid embarrassment. And so what brought down President Nixon back in the 1970s was he sent his political operatives out to break into the headquarters of his political opponents, which would be an invasion of privacy. And he did that for the sake of finding out what information they had on him, because he was trying to gain political advantage. So I think you can find that when you read up on some of the critiques of the national security state, they go into some detail about how it's a corrupting force, when you can use that as a trump card, when you can say safety is at stake and that overrides people's rights, that, who watches the watchers? Those rights exist as a check on power, and it's very, very troubling when you take that check away, and people will use that overriding argument of national security in ways that wind up backfiring in the end, that are selfish from the beginning. Okay, I also think that you want to make the argument about security theater. I think you can make the argument about a lot of the security measures that you encounter in airports and how they're invasive of privacy, and there's the backscatter machines that show an outline of you naked, and there are extensive, very well-developed arguments about how this is chiefly done just to reassure people, but rationally it does little to nothing to make anybody safer. And so if you read up on some of these security theater discussions, I think you're going to wind up with some good illustrations. And I think that you can, ultimately I think you can say that the concept of security itself is problematic. That yes, the end state of having averted a threat, that's something that's desirable, but the systematic process of trying to figure out threats in advance and catch all of them, that's something that it sounds good, but it's actually got a lot of dysfunction to it, and that might be a good angle on the affirmative. So healthy democracy, I think, is your primary, where I would start at least, if I were writing a case on this, if I were writing an affirmative on this topic. And then beyond that, some ways of getting at the idea that national security would be valuable. I think that's a good way to start off on the affirmative. Now, a couple of interesting directions. If you're, on the negative, the first thing I think is that you have the obvious core of your argument, which is that survival trumps all other values. That threats to national security are existential threats to survival. And there are a lot of ways you can develop that argument. Terrorists smuggling nuclear weapons, cyber warfare. You could just say enjoyment of privacy is kind of moot, it's kind of academic, if what we're talking about, the price we pay for privacy, is that large numbers of people die, quite possibly, the entire nation dies. So you start from that premise, and you point out that the way the topic is written, it says where there's a genuine conflict between privacy, individual privacy, and national security. Because honestly, when you strip away all the strategic positioning around this topic, where there's a genuine conflict between the two, it's kind of a no-brainer. Privacy would need to give way if there were a genuine threat to national security, which is why affirmatives, I think the smart ones, are going to try to target that idea that devoting institutional resources to protecting national security, that actually doesn't work. And I think what you do as your interpretive move is you say, I don't have to defend a distortion of the concept and the topic. I get to defend it as it is properly practiced. I don't have to defend the abuse of claims to national security. The topic sets it up as if national security is threatened, and what gets in the way of protecting national security is someone's claim to individual privacy, well, my side of the topic is to say that individual privacy claim has to give way. And I get to claim as my ground genuine threats to national security. And you got to be like a bulldog on that. A couple of other arguments I think that you could make. I think you ought to say that where an attack happens, this is kind of an angle if the affirmative goes the direction of healthy democracy. When a successful attack happens, what then happens as a result is that people panic. And when people panic, they give away a lot of the democratic protections, checks and balances. And really, if you can carry on your national security program and your surveillance, and you can invade people's privacy on a low level, but you can head off the attacks, that actually that results in a more healthy, functioning democracy. And I think you'll find plenty of the same critics who talk about security theater. They talk about some of the decisions that were made in the wake of September 11th and how those actually did a lot of damage to our functioning democracy. And so that, I think, could take that affirmative angle and kind of turn it back. The one other argument that I think is a little bit intriguing, there are a few people who've made this argument over the years that honestly privacy is an endangered species. Privacy is going away with the, people carrying around smart devices, with people putting their entire lives into social media, that privacy is sort of a dying relic of culture past, and within our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes, they're going to look back and they're going to think that this norm we had that you have some kind of privacy is kind of quaint. And I don't know, that's a slightly radical argument. I would not use that with community judges who are going to be thrown off by something that's a little weird. But if you have a judge that's a little bit indulgent and will listen to an offbeat argument, then that's one that you might give a try. You might pay a little bit of a rhetorical price if the affirmative can make you seem very unreasonable in making that claim, but there's something to it, and there are a fair number of people who develop that claim, give reasons why, give examples that back it up. Okay, that is not every thought that we have had on this topic. That's just enough to get you started. In a couple of weeks, we are going to have a brainstorm session with some more developed ideas and see what you've been thinking, and you have got kind of a sharp new topic here, a little bit tilted, but certainly debatable on both sides. Have fun with it.